So welcome everybody to ERM 101 Overview and Background. This is the first of a 10-part series on managing electronic resources. I assume everybody has already seen this page here. This is the official page for the webinar series, Managing Electronic Resources. As it states here, it's a course of 10 60-minute sessions, and today is the first session. All of the information and resources which we're using and recordings will be linked from here. They'll also be on YouTube, but you'll be able to get them from here. You can already, for example, download the slides for today's session. There's a link here, and there will be links in the other sessions as well as we do them. Also, if you haven't registered for the future sessions, you can register here. I'm going to send out this page in the chat. Those of you viewing this via YouTube, you can see a link to this page in the description of the YouTube video. So today we're doing an overview and background. We want to make sure that today's session puts everybody on the same page, on the same level. So that next time when we refer to something, next week, for example, is ordering and activating collections. So we want to have a situation where in a future session, when we refer to something from a previous session, people know already what we're referring to. It's not mandatory that everyone attend every session. Recommended, of course, but if you're looking at a topic and you think that just doesn't interest you or you already know it quite well, you may want to skip it. However, it certainly won't hurt to attend all of the sessions. Each session builds on a previous session. So today, as it states here, we'll be discussing Alma's inventory model and terminology. That's going to be most of the session, the inventory model and the terminology, the types of electronic portfolios, and the user roles which are necessary for managing e-resources. So we're going to start with the PowerPoint. However, we're also going to be looking inside Alma. And again, anyone has a question or comment, feel free to send it in. And this is the presentation which you can all download from that official webinar series page, which we just looked at. So the general e-resource workflow. First of all, there has to be bibliographic data, because if we have an electronic resource, we need a title, at least a title, but we probably also want a publisher, a year, etc. So we need the bibliographic data. That bibliographic data we'll talk about in a moment may come from the community zone. If it's a resource which is linked to the community zone, it may come from the network zone. If you are in a network zone consortia sharing your bibliographic records through the network zone, it may be something you import via search resources, copy. It may be something you already have. In any case, there needs to be bibliographic data. That's the first step. Then optionally is to order the resource, to create a purchase order line. Now we say that's optional because you may just get the bibliographic data and then add the inventory, activate it, and work from there. It's possible, for example, to find something in the community zone and just click activate without first ordering it. However, ordering it is typically part of the process, and part of the whole activation process is combined with the ordering. You can activate without the ordering, but if you do an order, we'll see next week when we talk about ordering and activation. Let's just confirm that that's next week. Yes, ordering and activation workflow is next week. So you'll see then examples where we do use the acquisitions, and it's recommended to use the acquisitions. It allows for example, doing claims, following up on how much you're spending on various resources, and if you're also loading counter reports, then you can do the cost per use. Then there's the activation. after something, let me just close this Teams here. Sorry about that pop-up. Then there's the activation process. By activating something, you are making it available for the end user and also sending it to discovery. Typically, it will appear in discovery if it is already activated. Then there's the pay. If we ordered it, then it's going to need an invoice, etc. And then finally, there is the maintaining it. For example, if it is a subscription, a journal, which needs to be renewed, then at a certain point, it will need to be renewed. And there are renewal dates, renewal reminders, etc. So this is the high-level workflow. And here we have it a little more in depth. These are the same 5 points which we've got here in the picture. Have bibliographic data. It's a must because if we have a resource, it has to be connected to bibliographic data. Ordering the resource, we said, is not mandatory, but you won't be able to use the cost per use if you don't do that. You won't be able to keep track of how much different things are costing, etc. Activating the resource because we want to make it accessible to the end user, paying for the resource, and then maintaining it. Maintaining it typically when it's of type subscription. So that's the general workflow. I'm going to stop for a moment and just see if there's any questions or comments in the chat here. Let's see. I don't see any questions or comments in the chat, so I will move on. Let's go now, and I will share again. Okay. So the terminology. So we have the highest level is the electronic collection. Inside an electronic collection, there are portfolios. Each portfolio is a single title. The title is coming from the bibliographic details. There's 245 fields, for example. And each unit of that title is called a portfolio. And the portfolio, for example, will say the coverage as an example, if it's activated or not activated. The portfolio, we could say, is parallel to the physical item for physical inventory. For physical inventory, we have a bibliographic record, then we have a holdings record. Under the holdings record, we have several items. And with the portfolio, we have the bibliographic record, then we have the inventory, which would be a portfolio. Typically, the portfolios are part of a collection. And we'll see that, and we'll talk more about it in a moment. So for example, now, let's go into Alma. And let's search now for a portfolio. So among the electronic inventory, the ones which we can search for here, we've got electronic titles, electronic portfolios, and electronic collections. So let's start with an electronic portfolio, and let's search, for example, for Scottish women poets of the Romantic period, I believe this is. Let's see in a moment. And then we're going to go into the portfolio and start taking a look. Okay, this is a different one, but that's fine too. So let's take separation of church and state. So this is a portfolio. We're looking in the community now. Like I stated at the beginning, it's possible directly to activate it, which we're not going to do today. We're going to do that next week. Or we could first order it. But I'm looking now at portfolios. And we can see here the collection, the electronic collection, the higher level to which each portfolio belongs. For example, the separation of church and state is a manuscript. and it's part of a collection, Bacon Project Muse Global Titles. Let's do a search in my institution. And let's now say we want the Scottish woman poets of the Romantic period. Or let's just say, oh, I spelled that wrong. Okay. So now I'm in the institution. Again, I have a indication that this is part of an electronic collection. This icon here means it's connected to the community zone. I activated this in the past from the community zone. I can go back and forth between the community zone and the institution by clicking this icon. When it is blue, that means the portfolio is active. When it's gray, it means it's connected to the community zone, but it's not active. And we're going to see examples of those as well. If I come now, for example, and I click on this, then it's going to bring me to the community. Here I am in the community tab. And this icon here of the house means when I'm in the community zone that I've activated it in my institution, and clicking that brings me to the institution. So when I'm looking in the community, I've got a blue house icon, meaning it's in my institution. And when I'm in my institution, I have a blue icon here of the community, meaning I've activated it from the community. Let's take a look at this portfolio. I'm going to say edit portfolio. And so we can see it has an activation date. It has an electronic material type. In this case, it's a book. There are a lot of different types of material types for portfolios, as we can see here. And this one's a book. Because this is a book, when we go to the coverage, it doesn't have coverage. Typically, I won't say always, but typically a book, a portfolio of material type book will not have coverage because the whole book typically is included. When we have a journal, and we'll see an example of a journal soon, then it'll say which years are covered. For example, it might be volume 1, 2007 until volume 10, 2017, just volume 10, 2017, just as an example. Then we also have acquisitions information if it's connected to a purchase order line. And we have a link to the bibliographic record if I click here on the top, so I get to the bibliographic record. So that's one example of the portfolio. Let's move on. We already saw that we see the electronic collection there. Let's take a look more in depth here. Again, we're going to say electronic portfolios, Scottish women poets of the Romantic period. So this is part of Literature Online. If I were to have searched for this electronic collection, Literature Online, I'll say electronic collection, and I'll search for that electronic collection. I'm in my institution right now. So now I see that this has 14,656 portfolios. I can get to that portfolio list by clicking here. I'm now at the higher level. I'm looking at the electronic collection right now. And clicking the portfolio list, there we go. So now I see all of the portfolios which are part of that electronic collection. Let's take a look at an example which will be a journal. So within a portfolio, let's say electronic portfolios again, and let's search for any title. I'll say journal library science, or journal library will give me enough. Okay, so Law Library Journal is part of the electronic collection EZB Free 00999 freely available EZB journals. And if we look at this portfolio, now we do have coverage. We know we have coverage because we've got this little indication here. Anytime a tab, not only for e-resources, anytime a tab includes information, there's a little indicator there. So if we come to the coverage, we can see this is available from 2011 volume 1, excuse me, issue 1. So this one has coverage. We'll see also later, not necessarily today, ones that have acquisition information as well. Let's move on. So that's the portfolio and the collection. Let's actually look at the collection a little more in depth too. Let's take a look at this EasyB Free, the electronic collection that this one is available in. So we'll say electronic collection name. There we go. So now we have the electronic collection, which we already clicked from an electronic collection on the portfolio list. But let's edit the collection. And so now we have details of the collection. For example, we have a service. Every electronic collection, except for those of type database, we'll be talking about that today soon, has a service. The service is typically full text. It's also possible to have a partial full text. We'll talk about that, but it's rare. Partial full text is kind of a leftover from previous days. Typically, an electronic collection which is not of type database will have a service of type full text. And let's move on with everything here we saw. Okay. Let's look at another one. Let's take a look at this poems chiefly on religious subjects. Well, let's even stay where we are now. So I'm going to click View Full Text Portfolios. So these are the portfolios. So one of them, for example, is the, let's choose something, CDS Review. So CDS Review is a portfolio. Part of this collection, it has coverage. We can see that this is available from volume 99, 2006. By the way, the coverage is also important because if there is an article, a citation in the Central Discovery Index, in the CDI, it goes and checks if the institution has access to it by knowing what coverage do they have access to. For example, if there was an article from 2005 in the CDS Review Chicago Dental Society, and it was from 2005, then the institution would not have access to it and it would not appear unless there's another link there where you can get things beyond your scope. But if it was from 2006, volume 99, then it would appear because Alma knows that the institution has access to this. Let's go into Primo and take a look at this as well. So I'm going to go into the Primo, which corresponds to this Alma that I'm in. So if we're in Primo now, and we want to also take a look at this, same one here. We'll do a search now for the CDS Review. CDS Review in the library catalog. And here it is. And it says available online. And the link here is for EasyB Free 099 because that's the name of the electronic collection that it's part of. There's different ways to play around with this here, but in general, it will give the name of the electronic collection that it appears in. But then there's all kinds of rules you can say, but we'll talk about all that in future sessions. Let's head back to the PowerPoint and then let's see if there's any questions. That should cover it on the terminology, but let me take a look in the chat and see if there are any questions or comments. Are there any questions or comments? I don't see anything came in the chat, which is a little strange because there's 162 people in and there's nothing in the chat. So let me know, just give me a confirmation that you all still hear me. Someone send in a message and say, yes, we hear you, just so I can confirm everything's good. Okay, people are raising their hand. Okay, so no questions or comments. Okay. And just making sure, yep, everybody's saying that there's no questions or comments. Okay, great. Let's move on. So next, after the terminology, collections, portfolios, and titles. Those are the three entities which we just mentioned. The collection is the high level. It's what contains the portfolios, even though it is possible to have a standalone portfolio, a portfolio that's not part of a collection. It is possible to do that. But I won't say it's not recommended, but you'll be missing out on a lot of different advantages. If you use a collection, we're going to see as we go along throughout these 10 sessions, you have a lot more options. So let's take a look here in the collections, portfolios, and titles. Okay, so one title, I'm going to repeat what I'm saying because I want it to sink in. One title, when I say title, I mean MMSID, very often will appear in multiple electronic collections. Maybe some of you attended a few weeks ago. We did a session. I happened to be the one who delivered it on the collection overlap analysis, which checks which titles are in multiple electronic collections, because typically popular titles will be provided by multiple vendors in multiple collections. So there's one title, but every portfolio has its own portfolio ID and may appear in different collections. In every electronic collection, there'll be a different portfolio ID, but it will be the same MMSID, typically, unless someone, for whatever reason, cataloged two bibliographic records. And we could say that this is similar in a sense to physical items. There will be one bibliographic record with multiple physical items. Each item has its own item ID, typically also its own barcode, whereas the title here has portfolios. The electronic inventory is the portfolio. There may be multiple portfolios per electronic collection, and there may be multiple items per holdings record. I'm just comparing the different types of inventory. It might also be, as the third bullet here states, that each portfolio might have different coverage dates. So let's go take a look at this example here about women in marketing. And we'll come here and I'm going to do an electronic title search for starters. And this is about women and marketing. Okay. So here we have one MMSID. We're going to focus on this MMSID. This is a different record, which answered my query because it has the words from the title, but we're focusing on the first one. It's one MMSID. I did a title search, electronic titles. So the results now are on the titles level. Then we have electronic 3. So it says there are 3 electronic portfolios. So this MMSID is in 3 different portfolios. One of them is inactive and 2 of them are active. These are the 3 electronic collections that each of those portfolios are in. If I want to go to the portfolio list, I could click here. And now I have the 3 portfolios. By the way, we pointed out earlier that this icon means it's linked to the community zone. And I had stated that if it's blue, it's active. And if it's gray, I hope the colors are coming through well through the WebEx. If it's gray, that means it is linked to the community zone, but it's not active right now. So now we've got these 3 portfolios. If I had done this search instead of on the level of electronic titles, but rather electronic portfolios, then I would have gotten directly to the portfolios. Similar in a sense to those of you familiar with physical inventory, similar in a sense that if I had done a search by physical titles and then a search by physical items. Physical titles will give me the title level with a link to the items if I want, and physical items will give me each item. So here, electronic titles gave me on the title level, electronic portfolios gave me each portfolio. So here I've got each of the portfolios. Let's move on a moment. So this is what we saw, that there's 1 MMSID, 3 portfolios. By the way, we can see here that each of these has a different portfolio ID. The portfolio that's in Gales Engage Business Industry, Gales Engage Business and Industry, has this portfolio ID, and the one that's in OCLC Business and Industry has a different portfolio ID, and the one that's in Gales Engage Communications and Mass Media Collection has a different portfolio ID. The portfolio ID is the unique identifier of the portfolios. So there's 1 MMS ID, multiple portfolios as inventory, and each separate portfolio is in the collection. Okay, I'm going to go to the chat. I know at least 1 chat came in, and let's see what's happening here. Okay, so chat. Okay, can you elaborate on the not active but connected to the community zone scenario? Gray color icon in institution zone. What is the use case steps involved? Okay, so why the question? I'll rephrase the question. What would be a use case that we have a electronic portfolio linked to the community zone and not active? Okay, so it may be, for example, that I've ordered this from the community zone. I created a purchase order line, but the vendor is now dealing with it. He's making it available for me. And then I might need to, for example, do something with the proxy. I might want to change around the bibliographic information, but I went to the community zone. Let's even do it. We're not going to click now. We're going to do it next week, but it may be that someone comes to the community zone, is interested in ordering or a specific portfolio or an entire collection. And within the community zone, they click order. The item is on order, but the institution is not going to activate it yet because it's not yet available. So for example, let's search for something different. Let's say library and information science. And I'll keep it on the portfolio level. So when someone orders, there's something called a electronic resource activation task, which enables the institution to follow up and start activating something. And then they can begin the activation process. But from the moment that it's ordered, it's not yet activated, and therefore it would appear gray. The gray means we've ordered it, but it's not yet active. So if I come here and click activate, I can already start the activation process, which we'll do next week. But if I say order, that's going to create the purchase order line. And then later on, at some stage, the vendor will make it available. And if I need to do anything else to it, I'll do anything else to it. There's all different ways we can play around on the electronic collection level, on the portfolio level. Then I'll make it active. Okay, Let's now go look. The other chats came in. Glad to see there's chats. That way I know people are with us. Okay. Do the portfolios always have the same in different collections, the same name in different collections, despite having different portfolio IDs? The portfolios will have the same name if they're part of the same MMS ID, because it's going to be coming from the title of the bibliographic data. So the titles will have the same name if they're coming from the same MMS ID. They may have the same name just by chance. There might be multiple titles called, for example, an introduction to chemistry or library and information science for that matter. But these are probably the same MMS ID. We could even take a look here. This is one MMS ID. These first three are called library and information science. So if I were to, yeah, we can see they're all from the same MMS ID. I did a search and it all popped up. All of these are the same MMS ID. This is a nice example without even meaning it. All of these are the same MMS ID in the community zone, and they'll have different portfolio IDs. This one you can see starts 5357. This is 53559. This is 53547. So different portfolio IDs, same MMS ID, will have the same title. Okay, and that looks like all of the questions have been answered, and it doesn't look like there are any more, and we're good to go. Okay, where were we? Okay, back to the PowerPoint. Okay, so we saw that we have 3 portfolios. We saw that they all have separate portfolio IDs. Now, electronic collections, we saw have portfolios, except if it's an electronic collection of type database. A database, let's go look at the slide. A database does, let's say 2 things before we even go further. There's a common term in the world called database. And then there's what I'm referring to as, what does ALMA call a database? So as it states here in the indented bullet here, in ALMA, a database is a collection with no portfolios. And we'll see an example. Sometimes, as the last bullet say, vendors sometimes refer to other entities as a database. There's a lot of terms, not just in the electronic inventory world, where you've probably encountered different industries or different parts of industries even use the same term with slightly different meanings. So when I state database and when ALMA states database, ALMA means an electronic collection with no portfolios. Typically, as it states here, it's a resource of abstracting and indexing citation-only content, or in more popular terms, it's usually something like an encyclopedia. It's usually something that you can search and it gives you entries. And we're going to see an example. So if I were to come back into ALMA here, typically if I search for an electronic collection, I'll search for any electronic collection, eBook Central. And I'm searching in my institution. So we'll see here that these have portfolios. This one's got ProQuest Central Student has 15,448. ProQuest Central Essentials has 300, etc. And they have a service called full text. Service full text, which means that you can view the full text of the portfolios. So they all have portfolios. Here's one that's not active, apropos our previous discussion. So they all have portfolios and they have full text. A database will not have a service full text, and it also will not have portfolios. Let's go into one of these collections just to see what I mean by service. So in the additional tab, and we'll talk more about this in the future sessions, in the additional tab, We see this as service type here, full text. And I won't go into it now, but suffice to say, it has a service full text. On the other hand, a database, let's take this example here, Encyclopedia of Ludic Terms. So here, this is also an electronic collection, but it's a database. So it doesn't have any portfolios, and it doesn't say here that it has service full text like we saw in the previous ones. And if I edit collection and I come to the additional tab, I don't see that service down here of type full text. By the way, it's possible to get right to that service instead of going edit and switching tabs. You can go a quicker way, but we'll get to that another day. So that's the database. Let's come here and search for that. So here, if we search for this and I click it, Available Online, it's going to link me to a URL that is defined inside the portfolio of that collection, or inside the collection. Let's go take a look at why is it coming here? Remember, it goes to eolt.org, because we're going to see why in a moment. So this is the database. And then if we search for something, so you can see we're getting entries here. And we have a table of contents, et cetera, et cetera. So this is an example of a database. This is how it appears in Primo. And here, let's say edit collection. So we've got a general tab, additional, and here, this is the level URL, eolt.org. That's why it went to that URL when we clicked Available Online. If we had done the same for our previous example, I'm going to go back to, what was that, the dental something, JDC. We can actually do it on any portfolio. Oh, CDS, thank you. Chicago Dental Society. Thanks for remembering that. Someone just sent in what it was before. CDC. I'll already search here. CDC and dental. That should bring me. CDC Dental. Oh, SD. What was it, person who sent it in? Sorry about SDC. CDS, sorry. There's only so many combinations I can do with those three. Eventually, I would have gotten it. Okay, there we are, CDS review, and it's in the EZB free. So if we look at this one, that one's okay. And let's look at this in the institution. So this one also has a URL. We'll talk more about this as we continue, but suffice to say it's going to a URL. That database went to one URL instead of having multiple portfolios or even one portfolio. And here, oh, we didn't want to do that. We'll search by this. CDS Review Chicago Dental Society. Okay. There we are, available online. And linking there will bring us out to that URL. That's the same URL here that we saw here. Okay, so that's the basics of the database. I only showed the other one to compare. It's a type database. It has a URL, and it does not have portfolios. By the way, we can search by the type of portfolio, but we're going to get to that very soon. But within searching for electronic portfolios, there is a field for the type. And we have all different kinds of types here: the service type, electronic portfolio, material type, etc. So we could search even right here for all databases. And one of them will be ours, the Ludic terms. Okay, that covers the database. I'm going to stop for a moment here and just see if there's any questions or comments. So let me more and chat. Let's see what we got here. Is it possible to override the URL of a portfolio or database once we have it activated in our institution? I assume you mean you have activated a portfolio from the community zone. Correct me if I'm wrong, and you can write in. You've activated a portfolio from the community zone, and for whatever reason, you don't want to use the URL that's in the community zone. I assume from the question, okay, the person wrote back exactly. Someone else asked, can database have a service type full text? No, a database will not have a service type at all. Back to the previous question. So let's take a look, just so everybody's on the same page as what this person asked. So if a portfolio is activated from the community, for example, this one here, right on my screen, MathSciNet, we know this is activated from the community because we have this. And if we come to the edit portfolio in the linking, we have the URL. You can override it by doing an override URL. So you can override it. If you don't want to use these parsing parameters and this parser parameter, when I say parser parameters, we're going to talk about this in a few sessions, but sometimes a portfolio will have a URL, a straight URL that goes out. Sometimes a portfolio will have a parser parameters where it sends various parameters to the vendor, and that's how things get displayed. For example, eBook Central will have the institution's code, or sometimes it's called a secret, sometimes it's called an ID or a parser parameter. In any case, different things will get sent. Back to the question. Yes, you can change whatever URL you want to use. We have here the parser parameters override and the URL type override. So for example, let's go back to that database because that's a good example. And we can play around with it. Where I don't want to play around with something that has parsers. So we had an electronic collection with, I think the word in it was Ludic. There it is. So this, for example, this wasn't really on the schedule for today, but let's do it anyway. So this one has a URL here. But I say, I don't want to use that URL. I want to use http:// just going to stick anything in there, www.google.com, just so I have something else. I can override other things too here, by the way, if it's free or it's not free. I'm going to leave that in for a moment. And let's also, so remember, we changed this one. I'm just going to save these on the side right now, just so I put them back later. And let's also take that dental one. I'm afraid, let me go into the chat here and see what that one was called. So that was CDS. Okay, thank you. And that was a portfolio. Okay, so here also, I'm going to the linking. So it's giving me this, but I'm going to say, give me a URL override of a static URL, and that's going to go to yahoo.com. Save. So I've overridden to the person's question. I've said, I don't want to use the URL that's coming from the community. And I could check that in Primo. Or, by the way, I can do the view it from here. I can go right to here, or test activation. I can test it in different ways, but let's say here already. So it's available online. I may have to wait for the next publishing, or let's see. Okay, there we go. It's going to Yahoo already. I'm in Primo V. Everything's immediate. So I've overridden. Instead of using the one which we're using before, it's going to Yahoo. And if I go to the Ludic one, that should go to Google, if I remember correctly. I didn't know I had so many words here, so many records with the word Ludic. So now if I come here, it's going to Google. Let me just put those back. So this one we will fix. Now I want to use the original one. Going back to the linking, and I don't want to use an override. And save. And the other one was the Ludic, which is an electronic collection. And here too, we will get rid of the override. Great. So now if we check this out, and we do available online. Great. Now it's going to the original. And if we were to do the CDC review one in the library catalog, available online. So that's also going to the correct place. Okay, so yes, it is possible to override the URL, and that's how, what we just saw. Okay, let's go back to the chat, make sure we didn't miss anything. Okay, someone said, thank you, understood, and exactly. Okay, are we only able to change the links with free open access portfolios? No, you can do the override URL on ones that are not free as well. And that may be if for whatever reason the vendor said, oh yeah, all of the world goes through this URL, but for your case, please use this URL. So you can do it on ones which aren't free or open access as well. I just chose the free open access ones because I don't have a real institution here where we have real stuff. So I like to use the free ones to make sure I have access. Okay, let's move on now. 11:49. So let's go a little quicker. Inventory models. So this, I think, will be clear to most people in any case, but let's take a look. So there's three types of inventory in Alma. There's the physical, the electronic, and the digital. Digital is by subscription. If you subscribe to Alma Digital. Physical, we know what the physical is, and the electronic is where we are now. Most of this we already mentioned as we went along. I happen to have a bibliographic record here that has all three types. So if I search, not a bibliographic record, a title. It's not the same bibliographic record. It's a same title and different MMS IDs. So if I were to search here for feminist and the feminist movement Snowden. Snowden is the author. Oh, I didn't click search. Okay. There we go. So this one has digital inventory. This one has electronic inventory. This one has physical inventory. Alma is a unified resource management system, as we know, handles all types of inventory, not what we call separate silos where different types of inventory are managed differently and then all sent to one place. It's fully unified. All of the inventory is here in one repository, handled with similar workflows. We've got the physical ones where we make an order and then we do item arrival. We have the electronic where we do also an order, and instead of the item arrival, we do the physical activation. Excuse me, the electronic activation. So the physical we do receive or arrive. The electronic we do activate. But it's all unified and all together. There are searches for each type. They got the physical searches, electronic searches, digital searches. Then this is all of the administrative information, the order lines, invoices, vendors, etc. These are by the metadata and the type of inventory. So those are the three types of inventory: physical, electronic, and digital. Pretty straightforward. We already stated, but we'll state it again because it's important. The higher level, the top of the hierarchy for the electronic inventory is the electronic collection. One electronic collection has multiple portfolios. And we'll see as we go out through the sessions that it's advantageous because you can make one change on the level of the electronic collection to edit all of the portfolios under, or a group of portfolios, or you can import portfolios to the electronic collection. So that's like a case or a basket or something larger that includes all of the portfolios in it. Okay. There are types of electronic collections, and I'll just explain this here. When someone orders an electronic collection from a vendor, it may be that they want every portfolio that's in that electronic collection. If that's the case, then that would be an aggregator package, meaning we're going to take everything that's in the collection, and anytime something is added to the collection, the vendor may add things later on, the institution will also get that. That's an aggregator. Again, that's a term, like I mentioned before, which has its own slight nuances. Sometimes vendors are referred to as aggregators. A vendor can be an aggregator, or a vendor can be a publisher. But let's save that for another day. Then there's selective packages, where that would be an electronic collection. Let's say it has 100 portfolios, and the institution says, well, I'm only purchasing 87 of them because it'll cost me less, and I don't need those 13. That would be a selective package. Now we're going to see when we talk about acquisitions next week that when you order an electronic collection, there's a checkbox there, something to the effect of, in fact, I've got it written down here, automatically activate new portfolios. It's possible when ordering an electronic collection to automatically activate new portfolios as they're added to the electronic collection. So that would be, in a sense, an aggregator package. So this is what I stated before. When it's an aggregator, the library will activate the entire collection. When it's a selective, they will activate specific portfolios. The database we already discussed, it has no portfolios. And then what I stated here is that even if it's a selective package, if you check that box, we'll talk about it next week, which is automatically activate new portfolios, then automatically every new portfolio will be added. Let me go to the chat here. I saw something came in. Someone says, in the example of the feminist movement, why not all three of them in one place? We have many records which have physical and also electronic in the same MMS ID. Okay, so The question is, how come here we don't have one bib record with all three inventories? The reason is to catalog very specifically. For example, in North America, they typically do not do what you mentioned. Most of Europe also, most of the world, but more so in North America, will not put two types of inventory in the same bibliographic record. And if you do have the same types of inventory, you really can't catalog it properly. For example, just as a small example, if we were to look at this record here, which has the physical, that means the 008 position 23 will be O. O for online. There's other options for online too, but let me make this larger so people can see. So for example, inside the 008, position 23 is whether this is going to be electronic or physical or microfilm, etc. So if you have print and you have electronic in the same bibliographic record, whatever you put here will not be correct for one of them. But that's different methods. People do things differently. You can put all of the inventory in the same bib record. Some places frown upon that, others don't. Okay, let me go on here. Do I want to continue? Yes. More in the chat. Does an aggregator package automatically unlink titles that have come out of the package? On a very high level, yes. Let's talk about it when we get there. But for one answer, yes. You say, for example, if the journal title moves to a different publisher. Well, it might move to a different publisher, but the vendor may be keeping it in the same collection, but that's a whole nother story. Let's go on. Someone asked J key, B key mean in the parser parameters. Let's save that also for when we get to the activation. Okay, let's just move on here. Okay, we'll talk about this purchase order lines next time as well. However, suffice to say, and then this is the end in any case, purchase order lines in Alma in general, basically it's either physical, electronic, or digital, and it's either one-time or continuous. There are different names for them. In fact, let's go into Alma and look for them. If I say here, give me its order line types. Oops, sorry about that. TYP. PO line types. Okay, so these are all of the different purchase order line types. Let me make that a little smaller so people can see. And basically, there's two types. There's electronic or physical, one-time or continuous. Whether it's called, for example, electronic title subscription, electronic title continuous, or electronic journal continuous, or electronic journal subscription, they're the same. There's the inventory format and the continuity. So every time this is electronic and continuous, they behave the same. This is electronic and continuous. This is electronic and continuous. This is electronic and continuous. Not every institution has all of them enabled because it can make things confusing if you're not using them all. And those are the purchase order line types. And that's what's explained here and here. This is the table we just looked at, but in a nicer form. So for example, electronic book one time and electronic title one time behave the same because they're both one-time continuous. One-time continuous. And same with electronic journal subscription here and electronic title subscription here because they're both continuous electronic. We'll talk about that more when we do the ordering, which is next week. The continuous we'll see have renewal dates. And when it's a one-time, not a continuous, it doesn't have renewal dates. They can all use licenses. And that brings us to the end of the hour. Let me just check the chat and see if there's anything else. What's the difference between digital and electronic? I'll answer that on one foot, as they say. Electronic is something that you do not have in your file system. You cannot go to that file, move it around, delete it, make a master, a derivative, etc. Digital is a file that you actually own. You can do something with it. It's in your file system. You can upload it to Alma. You can do a master, a derivative, etc. Electronic is something typically that you subscribe to, where digital is a file that you have and you own. Okay, so thanks everybody. We will be posting the recording of this and we will be sending out a message that the recording is available. And we hope to see you next week. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.